MDM's 2024 Shift Conference came and went September 11th through the 13th in Denver, bringing together distribution leaders for 2.5 days of thought leadership around change management that crossed sales process, digital transformation, data analytics, and culture. We had more than 40 speakers, most representing distribution firms, some providing consulting for distributors, and some providing third-party solutions for them. As always, the purpose and goal of Shift was to provide a wealth of education, case studies, and analysis on change management and how distributors can enact it, ultimately making their organization ever more competitive. If you haven't by now, be sure to check out Tom Gale's September 19th blog that distilled his key takeaways from Shift, which I'll link to in the blog for this podcast. I'm Mike Hockett, MDM's executive editor, and similarly, this episode provides a debrief on what we learned at Shift and the common threads across the event's programming and the discussions we had there. I'm joined in this episode by MDM senior editor Vesna Brajkovic to share our thoughts on those Shift messages and things that we just couldn't stop thinking about on the flight home and in the weeks since the event. Enjoy. Vesna, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So since we already did a Shift preview podcast, a week before the event, I don't think we need to rehash, exactly what Shift is and a full recap of the event, especially since we're going to be rolling out a series of premium articles over the next couple of months that really will share a lot of our key takeaways from Shift. So here, I think it'd be useful for us to touch on some of those messages or quotes, anecdotes that you and I heard throughout the event that just really stuck with us, those things that we were compelled to jot down or that we just found particularly interesting. And before we go any further, I do want to mention right away that Shift 2025, as of this recording, is already less than 8 months away, as we're moving the event from the late summer up into the spring, as Shift 2025 is set for May 13th through the 15th on the outskirts of Denver in Centennial, Colorado. So stay tuned for registration info for that. And let's dive in here. For Shift, it kicked off with this day one workshop that was all about benchmarking your innovation and transformation levers. And this really was an assessment across sales process, digital capabilities, data analytics, and culture. And it asked company leaders to kind of self-reflect and share how they think that they're doing in these areas in terms of wins and challenges. And at the table that I was at, so this was all based on roundtable discussions with small groups, which I thought was really effective conversation. And at the table I was at, it led them to share some things that I think distributors might not otherwise share with other attendees. And one it shared actually about a recent email phishing scam that they fell victim to, which sounds like it was a pretty pricey endeavor that they lost out on. Another quote from a distributor at my table in that session said something that stuck with me. He said, quote, "Change is hard, even if it's change that is positive. They're fighting it, and that's the frustrating thing," end quote. And that quote, he's really referring to change management broadly, and I think it really helped illustrate what it's like for business leaders to try and get change management pushed through. And these CEOs and these presidents, they have the vision that they want to see come to fruition, but man, I can certainly imagine the frustrating that comes with seeing any resistance that comes to that change when you know without a doubt that it's ultimately going to help the staff that it's going to impact. So it was just cool to see these distribution leaders share some of these key details, things that they're seeing, maybe that they're struggling with, or on that note. So Vesna, any thoughts from your end at the table that you were at on this benchmarking workshop?
Yeah, and I heard a lot of similar things. The changing the habits of salespeople, one in particular that I heard a lot about, and kind of this idea of the salespeople that we hear so much about wanting to own that customer relationship. And so when you're, trying to implement a CRM and things like that, and who kind of has ownership of that relationship. So that's another thing really change management related.
Yeah.
And the conversations were just, like you said, it was interesting to hear from so many different people in different industries, all having very similar struggles.
Yeah. And it's always interesting to hear when we're talking about change management, anyone that mentions, oh, we just went through an ERP integration or we just changed our ERP system, you almost hear like this sympathetic sigh coming from everyone else saying like, "Oh, I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Because, everyone says that those kind of big tech stack changes they're painful. And no matter how, easy that a vendor might, all these tech vendors out there are awesome, but it just seems like it's one of those things that you just know it's going to be a giant animal that is just going to be painful at different points. So there was just another thing that I remembered from our table. Someone mentioned, yeah, they just went from one ERP system to another. And there was just some good conversation about how painful was that process.
For sure.
So one of the big highlights of Shift was we had three fireside chats with three prominent CEOs in this space. We had Keith Rizolis of ABC Supply, John Weborg of Stellar Industrial Supply, and John Engel of Wesco International. So I thought that was a nice collection of distributors from different industries, very different sized companies. I interviewed John Weborg of Stellar, and Stellar has a fantastic reputation as a independent distributor that just continues to innovate. And they're really an interesting case study on how of a company that's leveraging some third-party tech solutions like many distributors do, but has also supplemented that by building some of its own tech solutions in-house. And doing in-house innovation can be seen as a risky and perhaps expensive endeavor. But Weborg really emphasized how the company made it work and how it's resulted in having much more control and customization when it comes to what they otherwise might have ended up with if they went third party for absolutely everything. So it was just interesting to have that conversation with him on stage. John Engel of Wesco, the largest electrical distributor that we cover. It was interesting to hear details about Wesco's multi-year integration of Annixter International, which Wesco acquired in mid-2020 amid the developing pandemic chaos, which essentially doubled the business. I thought John and Tom Gale, who did that interview, really did a great job of diving into the data analytics component of Wesco's transformation. They really got into how Wesco, their biggest priority was finding they have this one data lake now that's their single source of truth. And for just a company of that scale to kind of really get into the weeds of the data analytics component was just pretty cool. One nugget that I found from that discussion was John Engel noting that after a 6-year period beginning from 2021 and through 2027, virtually every facet of the business processes for Wesco will be new. So by sometime in 2027, Wesco will kind of be like the ship of Theseus, a completely different company of different components than it was 6 years ago from a processes standpoint. But of course, with the same North Star, a lot of the same leaders there that have led them through this transition. So it was just a really nice transformation story. And then Keith Rizolis, he leads a $20 billion revenue distributor in ABC Supply, which is number one on our top distributors list for building materials and construction. He really leaned into the entrepreneurial autonomy that has keyed ABC's success, talking about how ABC empowers its vice presidents, branch managers, and really everyone in the company to make decisions and take chances. He said that ABC's leadership always gives this message that reiterates run what you're doing as if you own the company. Like they want you to have that sort of autonomy that you feel compelled to make decisions that you think are going to help the company.
I really like the way he described it as kind of this decentralized management and kind of running the business, as you said, kind of empowering the managers to have this entrepreneurial spirit themselves. I thought that
Yeah.
was really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of these distributors that we've seen that we know are very successful reiterate that same message of local empowerment, flattening the business, giving more people decision power, and just trusting them to do the right thing instead of micromanaging down to the final detail. So
Right.
it was Rosales that noted how he wants his staff to take chances on things that are going to move the needle. If it doesn't work out, if it fails, or just only results in very incremental change, he's probably not going to end up hearing about it. So it's kind of a low risk, high reward model that they want their staff just to abide by. But if it works and produces real results, he definitely wants to hear about it so that the company can scale, this new solution or just new way of doing things. So yeah, it was a really neat message about empowerment. Any other thoughts from any of those firesides from your end?
Yeah, kind of what you said about trying new things, failure. That's something that really stuck out to me that Keith Rizolis in specific was talking about. And one thing he said that you cannot create competitive advantage based on price. There has to be something of value beyond that's pushing your company forward. And he went on to say, a reduction of friction is just as important as a reduction in costs. So that means just kind of pushing the envelope, pushing it forward. And we heard kind of the same thing throughout the talks we were hearing about. Andy Clement from Gardner was saying, kind of just embrace experimentation over this idea of having perfection.
Yeah.
And then, Kevin Reed Morris in his keynote talking about kind of business model innovation said the distributors who try and not necessarily even succeed at anything, they're at least 5 times with different business model innovations, they're more likely to have revenue generating results. So
Yeah,
I think that was really the key point, that innovation, failure, that's really the gist is, honestly, and it sounds kind of like anti-advice, but just invest, empower your people to fail fast and fail often to get to that place where you're successful.
yeah. And I think we've heard that fail fast message, in
Yeah.
shift in years past at different events. Mike Marks always leads by that message of fail fast. You don't want to be a pioneer. You want to be a fast follower. But I think that, like we said, such a key central message among all the shift content. It was this nice message of experimentation among all our speakers, saying empower people to do things, trust people to make good decisions. If you have the right people in place, they're going to make good decisions. Especially when it's at the local level, that's where those speed to make decisions can really help that customer stickiness. And it was just a nice theme of try new things. If it doesn't work, learn from it and move on.
Yeah, and
Very
I
cool.
think that's why when I was taking my notes, and I was taking my notes with the thought of, okay, what is the key thread that's combining all these talks? And it really was innovation is essential for business growth. That was the main key takeaway. And I want, before we really dive into that, I just want to acknowledge that innovation is kind of one of those words that has lost some power in its meaning for me. And maybe it's just because I'm reading a lot and hearing a lot in the distribution industry, but it's just those certain words and terms that start to become meaningless the more you read them or hear them without
Yeah,
greater context. Your brain, it's just not making the connection anymore to concrete things. So a perfect
exactly.
example for me is words like sustainability, even transformation. I just feel like they're such powerful words that encompass these complex processes and movements, but their meaning starts to disappear.
Yeah.
And that's one word, innovation. But I wanted to use that word in my key takeaway because there's really no other word that encompasses the essence of what we were learning at Shift. And I guess my thought was, what makes distribution companies successful long term is that they're pushing those business models forward. Diversifying revenue streams is something we heard a lot. Don't be shy, introducing new elements to those business models. Answering that question, how do you as distributors create, capture, and then deliver value? But then more than that is we're really Kevin Reed Morris's point in his keynote, when he partners with us on MDM research, was how do you create a business where you are consistently introducing new elements to your business model?
One session that just really stood out to me was Rama Dikshidhar, who's the Chief Digital Officer of U.S. Electrical Services, which is number 11 on our top electrical distributors list. He had a session, it was kind of like a fireside session on day 3 in the late morning. And I've never seen Rama speak before, but he spoke with fire. It was
Yeah.
awesome. Like you could tell he was passionate about these sales management topics. And kind of one of his core messages was how he emphasized how the distribution industry and leaders within it really seem to underestimate sales teams' willingness to change and try new things and learn new ways to serve the customer who is also changing. He kind of got into there's this notion that sales teams just want to be left to their own devices and they like doing things that the way they always have. And you could kind of say that about every position at these distribution firms, but I think sales, there's this notion that if you try to put some kind of new change on them, that it's going to be met with, widespread resistance. And I'm sure there are case studies where that is true, but he got into, don't just assume that your sales team is going to hate, this new change or is not going to embrace it. Understand that your sales team, they want to get better, they want to improve, but if you articulate the value that this change management is going to have for them, how it's going to make their life easier, they are, in some cases, surprisingly willing to change and do things differently.
Yeah, and
Um,
he was another person who, back to our other point, was really passionate too about advising people to have kind of people of innovation. He called them in every team
yeah.
and also letting them lead. So kind of another full circle thing, kind of going back to our original point of innovation.
Yeah, I think he had the quote. He said, "Find people in the organization who will challenge you and keep you thinking
Yeah.
creatively." And I just thought that was important because I think there's the notion that leaders just they delegate, and if you have some people that if they think something's a bad idea and they should let you know about it. Surround yourself with people who are going to not only support your decisions, but are going to let you know if they think maybe your line of thinking isn't quite what they're thinking, and they'll let you know why that is. Rama called it good tension, which I think is a good term there. So yeah, don't be afraid of creating some good tension or having people that will, create that good tension for you. I was just blown away by his session and just how it was perfect. It was perfect for what you need on day 3 of a conference like Shift. All right. Well, I think we kind of covered a lot of sessions here in a nutshell. Any other things that anecdotes, stats, quotes that, that you jotted down or stood out to you, Vesna?
Yeah, I think I sat in on the digital track where this is when attendees kind of broke out into topic related sessions. And I was sitting on an AI related session with Nick Pericli of Profit Optics, which, if you're an MDM follower, you know him. He's really great, but he's also a great teacher. And to see the engagement in the room, he was essentially going through some practical uses of ChatGPT and the engagement in the room and the interest. I really like to see that because I always assume everyone wants to know about AI, but when you see people, oh, this is something easy that we can do on the team. You're hearing chatter throughout the session. And then after the session, that was encouraging to see that there was something helpful and something concrete coming from an AI session, which is not always the case.
Yeah, these distributors have been hearing for almost 2 years now, just all these wonderful things that you can do with ChatGPT. But I think Nick Pericles is one of the few in the industry that can actually show exactly here's how you use it on a daily basis. Like it was very tactical, which I think is what
Yes.
people are looking for more of.
And I think it made such a big difference between being a presentation and then he literally had ChatGPT up or a version of it.
Yeah.
And I actually don't know which program he was using, but I think it was ChatGPT.
Mhm.
And was actually putting prompts in.
Yeah.
So concrete.
Yeah. So looking forward, I mentioned how Shift 2025 will be early in the year, May 13th through the 15th in Denver. And that means that we're already in planning mode for that program in terms of creating the content, finding speakers. And we always love to get feedback on how we can keep improving Shift and what attendees want to see more of. And as always, we got a wealth of great feedback from this year's event. But there's a couple things that I heard attendees say. One was that, they love the case studies, those fireside chats that were up there. They love to hear stories of how a distributor went from point A to point B and the challenges and wins that they had along the way. So they definitely want to see more of those kind of on-stage case studies. I heard another attendee say that they would like to see more content around pricing strategy. Pricing is always a top priority for distributors, and if industrial demand does pick up here in the fourth quarter and accelerate in 2025, as most economic predictions have, that will definitely force distributors to adjust their pricing after this past year and a half of flatness and softness out there. I had another attendee say that they want even more data analytics content. And we did have a dedicated breakout session for that, but I just think given that more and more distributors are leaning into what they can do with data analytics, it's no surprise that leaders are looking for all the thought leadership that they can get with that. And of course, you'll find no better source for that than MDM Analytics. which is a department of MDM that is dedicated to providing demand benchmarking for distributors and manufacturers from going from a nationwide view down to a county specific level so you can really see how you're doing compared with the industry average and what your competitors are doing. So please visit our MDM Analytics website to learn more about that. And I know our MDM Analytics team will be happy to give you a demo to see that all that that department can do. So we're going to look to continue to infuse more of what attendees are asking for as we plan Shift 2025. So Vesna, with that out of the way and looking forward to next year already, just any final thoughts here before we close out?
Yeah, and there was a quote that I jotted down from Kevin Fitzpatrick of Race, and it's a little bit out of context, but I just thought it was funny and kind of encompasses everything. I don't know how long it takes because it's still taking a long time talking about kind of sales transition journey. And I think that's such a good quote in so many different contexts because, people are, even successful companies are still learning, still changing. They're still implementing change management. So I think going into 2025 and going into that May conference that we'll have next year, I think that everyone will be kind of recharged, renewed, and ready to get started on their next path or continuing what they have been doing.
Yeah. And hopefully, by the time May 2025 rolls around, hopefully business conditions are at least a little improved.
Yeah.
I think there will be more clarity on what the Fed is doing and everything on that front. So it could be just a more active business environment, which just might spur different discussions as opposed to when there's a flat or soft business environment. So definitely the business environment, I think, can impact some of the content that we'll have around Shift 2025. So definitely pay attention to MDM for registration info. We'll try to roll that out as soon as possible. But otherwise, I think that this is just a nice debrief to kind of just share. I think when we come away from a conference like this, we come away with all these ideas, all these quotes, these messages, but it's nice to be able to hash them out with even between us editors and with our audience here. So hopefully our audience finds this sort of debrief valuable.
For sure.
All right. Well, for the MDM podcast, this is Mike Hockett and Vesna Brajkovic. This is us signing off. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the MDM podcast. Like what you just heard? You can find all of our past episodes at mdm.com/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And as a reminder, MDM just announced the dates of our 2025 Shift Conference to be held May 13th through the 15th in Denver. So please mark your calendars and stay tuned for registration info.